The phone rang at 3:12 in the morning. Not loud, not frantic, just steady enough to wake a man who hadn't slept deeply in 31 years. I stared at the ceiling for a full second before reaching for the nightstand. When you get to my age, you learn certain rules. One of them is simple. Nothing good ever comes from a phone call at this hour. If someone's calling you before dawn, it's either a mistake or something you buried a long time ago clawing its way back. Hello? My voice sounded older than I felt. There was a brief pause, the kind that tells you the person on the other end is checking notes, bracing themselves. "Mr. Arthur Hale?" a man asked. Calm, professional, too careful. "Yes?" "My name is Daniel Ruiz. I'm calling from North Shore Recovery Services. I need to ask you a sensitive question, sir. Are you the father of Daniel Hale?" The room tilted. For a moment, I thought I might be having a stroke. That would have been easier to explain. "My son," I said slowly, each word measured, mechanical. "My son was buried 31 years ago." Silence stretched between us, not confusion, not surprise. The kind of silence that comes when someone knows exactly what you're about to say and has been trained for it. "We're aware of that, Mr. Hale," he replied. "But the man in our care insists you're his biological father." I sat up, the sheet sliding off my legs. My heart wasn't racing. It was heavy, like it already knew this was going to hurt. "You've got the wrong person," I said. "That happens." "It does," he agreed. "But this individual knew details that aren't public. Your wife's name, the scar on your left wrist from a power tool accident in '89, and the fact that you still pay for a headstone in Cedar Ridge Cemetery." I swallowed. I hadn't told anyone about the headstone payments. $18,000 over 3 decades. A quiet promise I kept to a boy who never got old. "Where is he?" I asked. There it was. The moment I crossed the line from disbelief into something far more dangerous. "He's stable," the man said. "But he asked that you come in person. There's paperwork. Something he wants you to see." I looked at the clock. 3:14 a.m. 31 years ago, I'd gotten a call like this from a police station. Back then, it was hope wrapped in uniforms and bad coffee. That hope had cost me my house, my savings, and the kind of sleep other men take for granted. This time felt different. Not hope. A warning. "I'll be there," I said. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The house was quiet. No pictures on the walls anymore. I'd taken them down when I moved into this smaller place. Less to explain when people asked questions I didn't want to answer. I told myself this wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a second chance. It certainly wasn't a happy ending. If this was anything, it was the opening chapter of something ugly. The kind of story where old wounds don't heal. They testify. The kind of story people online like to call a revenge story, even when no one wins. I put on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and paused at the door. I wasn't going to meet my son. I was going to meet the man who had survived being dead. And whatever he wanted from me, it wasn't forgiveness. People talk about losing a child like it's a single moment, like it happens once, and then it's over. They're wrong. Losing my son wasn't one event. It was a bill that came due every single day for the next 31 years. After Daniel disappeared in 1994, I didn't grieve the way people expect you to. I didn't sit in a dark room and stare at the wall. I went to work. I made phone calls. I drove roads I'd never driven before, knocking on doors that didn't want to open for a man like me. I told myself that if I stayed busy enough, I could outrun the fear that settled in my chest every night. His mother had already been gone for 2 years by then. Cancer doesn't care how badly a family needs a break. When she died, it was just the two of us. I learned how to cook badly and pretend it was fine. I learned how to listen more than I talked. I learned how to be both the strict parent and the soft one, even when I got it wrong. And then one night, he didn't come home. The police were polite. That's something people don't tell you. They're careful with their words. They never promise anything. They say things like, "We'll keep looking," and "These cases can take time." Time is easy to ask for when it's not your life being measured in hours. I sold the house the following year. Not because I couldn't afford it, at least not at first, but because every room felt like an accusation. His shoes by the door. The dent in the couch where he used to drop his backpack. I used that money, and then my savings, and then my retirement, to pay private investigators who always sounded confident, right up until they stopped returning my calls. $72,000. That's what it cost me to keep believing my son might still be alive. I never once thought of it as sacrifice. That word sounds noble, too clean. This wasn't noble. It was instinct. The same instinct that makes you reach out without thinking when a child is about to fall. You don't calculate the cost. You just move. Some nights, when the house was too quiet, I'd sit at the kitchen table and ask myself a question I never said out loud. If he walks through that door tomorrow, will I still recognize him? And maybe a harder one. Would he recognize me? I wonder how many of you listening have ever loved someone that way. The kind of love that doesn't keep score. The kind that doesn't expect repayment. If you have, you already understand what I'm saying. If you haven't, I hope you never need to. In 1997, they called me in to identify remains. They didn't say it was him. They said they were reasonably confident. 70% to be exact. I learned that day how flexible certainty can be when everyone wants closure. I paid for the funeral myself. $18,000 for a casket that held nothing I could recognize as my son. I kept paying for the headstone after that, every year, quietly. A father's way of saying, I didn't stop being yours just because the world moved on. People think time makes things easier. What it really does is teach you how to carry weight without dropping it. So when that phone rang at 3:12 in the morning and a stranger asked if I was Daniel Hale's father, it wasn't hope that answered for me. It was 31 years of unpaid debt. And I was about to find out whether any of it still mattered. They didn't call it a body. They called it remains. That word showed up early in the conversation, soft and technical, like it was meant to protect someone. It didn't protect me. It just told me, before anyone said it out loud, that whatever they had found didn't look like a boy I could recognize anymore. It was 1997 when they asked me to come down to the station, 3 years after Daniel vanished. 3 years of posters on telephone poles. 3 years of calling his name in places where no one answered back. By then, hope had stopped feeling sharp. It was dull, worn down. Something I carried because setting it down felt worse. The detective didn't rush. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes trained to read reactions without showing any of his own. We're not saying it's your son, he said carefully. But based on what we have, we're about 70% certain. 70%. I remember thinking how strange it was that a number could decide the rest of my life. They showed me a jacket. Not the jacket, what was left of it. The color was close enough to make my stomach drop. They showed me a watch, scratched and cracked. I told them Daniel had owned one like it. I didn't tell them he hated wearing it because it felt heavy on his wrist. The dental records weren't conclusive. Too much time, too much damage. That phrase came up more than once. I nodded every time, like I understood what any of it meant. What they really wanted was permission. Permission to close the file. Permission to stop looking. Permission to turn a missing boy into a solved case. They didn't say that part. They didn't have to. I asked them what happens if I say no. The detective hesitated just long enough to be honest. Then we keep it open, and you keep waiting. I went home that night and sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up. I thought about how tired I was. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that settles into your bones and stays there. I thought about the last thing I'd said to Daniel before he disappeared. Something stupid. Something small. The kind of thing you assume you'll have a chance to take back. 70% was enough. That's the part people judge later, when the story gets told in cleaner lines. They say things like, "I would have waited," or "I wouldn't have given up." But waiting isn't brave. Sometimes it's just cruel. The funeral was quiet. No open casket. No long speeches. Just a name on a program and a hole in the ground that felt too final for something so uncertain. I paid $18,000 for the service, the plot, the stone. I signed every paper myself. No one offered to help. I didn't ask. When they lowered the casket, I didn't cry. I stood there and told myself that this was what moving on looked like. That this was me doing the responsible thing, letting my son rest. Afterward, people said the things people always say. He's in a better place. At least you have answers now. I nodded and thanked them, because that's what you do when someone thinks they're helping. I kept paying for the headstone after that, every year, quietly. No reminders, no announcements. Just a line item in my budget that never felt optional. I didn't stop being his father that day. I just learned how to be one without a living son. And for 31 years, I believed that was the end of the story. I left before sunrise. The sky was still that dull, uncertain gray that doesn't belong to night or morning. I didn't turn on the radio. I never do on drives like this. Silence is easier when you don't trust your thoughts. The road out of town looked the same as it always had. Gas station on the corner, closed diner with the flickering sign. A place I'd passed 1,000 times without thinking. That morning, every mile felt deliberate, like I was crossing a line I'd sworn I wouldn't cross again. I told myself this wasn't hope. Hope is loud. Hope talks too much. This felt quieter than that, more like a reflex, like your hand reaching out before your brain catches up. I kept my eyes on the road and my mind somewhere else. 31 years ago, to a different drive, a different day. Back then, I'd driven like a man chasing something, speeding, checking mirrors, convincing myself the next turn would change everything. This time, I drove like a man who already knew better. Every few miles, something tried to pull me under. A memory. Daniel at 12 slouched in the passenger seat, pretending he wasn't listening when I talked about school. Daniel at 16, taller than me, asking for the keys with that half smile that meant he already knew my answer. I hadn't thought about those moments in years. Not like this. They came back, uninvited, sharp around the edges. I wondered what kind of man I was about to meet. If he was angry. If he blamed me. If he'd spent 3 decades building a life that didn't include the word father at all. I wondered if he'd look at me and see a stranger, or worse, someone inconvenient. That thought sat heavy in my chest. At a red light just outside the city, I caught my reflection in the windshield. Older than I felt. Lines that hadn't been there when Daniel disappeared. Hands that shook slightly on the steering wheel. I looked like a man who'd already been finished once. I almost turned around. Not because I didn't want answers, but because answers have a way of costing more than questions. If this was a mistake, if this man wasn't my son, I knew exactly what would happen. I'd go home. I'd pay the quiet price. I'd add this to the long list of things I didn't talk about. And if it was him? That was the thought I couldn't finish. The building came into view just after 9. Clean, modern. The kind of place that looks harmless until you realize why people end up there. I parked across the street and sat for a moment with the engine off, my hand resting on the key. I wasn't ready. But I went anyway. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and coffee that had been sitting too long. A woman at the desk asked my name. Her voice was polite, practiced. She didn't know she was holding 31 years of my life between 2 fingers and a keyboard. "Have a seat," she said. "Someone will be with you shortly." I sat. My knee bounced without my permission. I folded my hands, unfolded them, folded them again. Around me, people came and went, carrying their own versions of bad news. I wondered if any of them knew how close you could be to getting everything back and losing it all at the same time. When the door finally opened and a man stepped out, I stood before he said a word. He didn't call me Dad. He just nodded and said, "Mr. Hale, he's ready to see you." And in that moment, standing on the edge of a room I'd waited 31 years to enter, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. Whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't going to give me peace. It was going to ask me for something. And I wasn't sure I still had it to give. The room was smaller than I expected. White walls, 1 window, a table bolted to the floor like someone had once tried to leave with it. The kind of room designed to make sure conversations stayed exactly where they started. He was already inside when I walked in, sitting, hands folded, back straight, waiting. I knew his face before I let myself admit it. The shape of it, at least. The line of the jaw, the way his hair fell forward slightly on the right side, the same way it used to when he was a teenager and refused to cut it. Time had worked on him, thickened his neck, carved lines around his mouth, but it hadn't erased him. What stopped me wasn't the face. It was his eyes. They lifted when the door closed behind me. Not curious, not relieved, just alert, measuring, like he was bracing for something unpleasant but necessary. I stood there too long enough for the silence to start asking questions neither of us wanted to answer. "Mr. Hale," he said. Not Dad, not even Arthur. Just the name, formal and distant, like we were about to discuss a contract instead of 31 years. I nodded once. My mouth didn't trust itself yet. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. Anyone with half a glance could have seen it. Same nose, same left ear that stuck out just a little more than the right. I remembered teasing him about that when he was a kid. He'd hated it then. I wondered if he still did. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Polite, controlled. "Please," he said. I sat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the building filled the space between us. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed, life continuing at a distance. "I didn't ask you here to hurt you," he said finally. That was the first thing he chose to say. Not "I'm sorry," not "I didn't mean to disappear," not even "I'm alive," just that. I studied his hands, strong, scarred in places I didn't recognize, hands that had lived a life I hadn't seen. "I didn't ask to be here," I replied. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "But here we are." A flicker crossed his face. Not guilt, not anger. Something closer to irritation, like this part of the conversation was already taking too long. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, sealed. He placed it on the table between us with deliberate care, lining it up straight, like it mattered. "I need you to read that," he said, "before you say anything else." I didn't touch it. Instead, I looked at him. Really looked. Tried to find the boy I'd raised in the man sitting across from me. Tried to match this version to the kid who used to fall asleep on the couch with his shoes still on, who once cried because he thought a stray dog was lonely. "Why now?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Because now it matters," he said. "And before now, it didn't." That one landed hard. I reached for the envelope then. My hands shook just enough that I noticed. He did too. His eyes followed the movement, sharp and focused, like everything hinged on what I did next. Before I opened it, I saw the writing on the front. Block letters. Careful. Practiced. "Dad, I'm not your son." The room felt smaller all at once. I didn't open the envelope yet. I just sat there, looking at the words, realizing that whatever reunion I'd imagined during that long drive, whatever fragile hope I'd let myself carry, it had already been replaced. This wasn't a meeting. It was a declaration. And I was about to find out exactly how much being his father was worth, now that he no longer needed me to be one. I didn't open the envelope right away. I kept my eyes on the handwriting instead. Careful, controlled, the kind of handwriting you practice when you want the message to sound final. "Dad, I'm not your son." He watched me read it. Not my face, my hands. Like he was waiting to see if they'd shake hard enough to justify what he was about to say next. "That's not meant to be cruel," he said. His voice was even, almost rehearsed. "It's just accurate." Accurate. I nodded once, because nodding felt safer than speaking. Because if I spoke, the wrong thing might come out. Or worse, the right thing. "I need you to understand something," he continued. "This isn't personal." That's when I finally looked up. He met my eyes, steady and unflinching, like he'd already decided how this conversation would end. Like he'd been having it in his head for years, and I was just late to my own role. "If you acknowledge me," he said, "things reopen. Files, statements, people asking questions that don't need answers anymore." "And if I don't?" I asked. A pause. Short. Calculated. "Then everything stays where it is." There it was. The trade. My name for his silence. My fatherhood for his safety. I picked up the envelope at last. It was heavier than paper should be. He noticed. His jaw tightened just a fraction. "You don't have to read it," he said quickly. "The front says enough." It did, and it didn't. 31 years, I said quietly. "That's how long I thought you were dead." He shifted in his chair, not uncomfortable, impatient. "I didn't ask you to do that." No, of course he hadn't. I thought about the house I sold, the jobs I worked past my limits, the nights I sat alone at a kitchen table, convincing myself that grief was the price of love and nothing more. I thought about how none of that fit neatly into this room, into his life. "You're right," I said. "You didn't ask." He exhaled, like that settled it. "I'm asking you now," he said, "to let this go, to let me go." The words were polite, reasonable, delivered with the confidence of a man who believed the math favored him. I felt something cold spread through my chest, not anger, not rage, embarrassment. That's the part no one warns you about. Being denied doesn't just hurt. It makes you feel foolish for having given so much in the first place. Like your devotion was a misunderstanding. Like your sacrifice was a clerical error. I slid the envelope back across the table, unopened. "I won't say anything," I said. His shoulders relaxed, just a little. "But don't tell me it isn't personal," I added. "Because it is. You're asking me to disappear so you don't have to." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence did the work for him. I stood. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. At the door, I paused, not to plead, not to threaten, just to say the truth. "I was your father," I said. "Every day you were gone." I didn't wait to see his reaction. "And before this chapter ends, let me ask you something. Quietly, honestly. If you gave someone your whole life without keeping score, and one day they told you it no longer counted, would you walk away with your dignity? Or would you fight to be remembered?"